Thank you for being here tonight. Tonight's just a little bit different. All in all, our service looks like this just about every Sunday night when we gather, but tonight we wanted you to hear from some different voices. You hear from me quite a bit, you hear from some other people on occasion, and it's typically more in like a sermon or teaching style kind of interaction. But tonight we wanted it to be a little bit different. So tonight you actually get a chance to hear from our parish elders. So we installed these elders over the summer. Some of them you know really well. Some of them maybe they're new faces to you, or you're a new face to them, and they'd like to get to know you a little bit, I'm sure. But our hope tonight is that you would hear a little bit from their heart about generosity, about what it means to be generous, about what it means to receive generosity. That's our hope for tonight. So we're all I'm gonna have the elders come up here and sit up here with me, and I'm gonna ask them a few questions, and you're gonna hear a little bit about their life and some of the things they've experienced. Here's what I want you to listen for. I want you to listen for maybe a story or an experience that they've had that sparks generosity in your mind, or maybe expands your imagination for how you can model the way of our Father and be generous to the world as He has been generous to us. That's our hope tonight, okay? So would you please give a warm Englewood welcome to our parish elders. Okay, so our first question is going to prime the pump. You're going to get to know them a little bit, hear a little bit of their story, both their story of faith and their story of work, family, that kind of thing. We're going to move through these questions as quickly as we can. It's likely that you'll hear something at some point and go, I wish they would have talked more about that. That's why we do happy hour afterwards. That's why they've made themselves available to you in various ways so you can ask more about that thing. So if you hear something that is curious to you and you want to hear more about it, jot their name down or jot down what they were talking about and see if you can get some info from them later, okay? So Shelby, we're going to start down there with you, and we're going to move this way. So let's start with quick introduction. Who are you? Tell us about your faith. Tell us about do your life story in like a minute, right? Can you do that?
My whole life.
Okay, go ahead. Day one.
Just kidding. I'm Shelby Hill. I am married to Adam Hill here, but I had the opportunity to grow up in the church in actually a position of where I was a pastor's kid, PK, or a missionary kid at different points in my life, to MK. So that was pretty unique. I feel like we had a lot of transition. I was exposed to a lot of, church politics at a young age, probably by accident. I probably heard that on my own terms. But it was really interesting getting to grow up in that sense because I feel like it allowed me to see the importance of generosity because of how it would impact my dad's job and our livelihood as a family. And so one way that my family really took on generosity was through opening their home to people. And so we kind of always had a revolving door. And it was the kind of house where you could walk in and be like, oh, your dinner's ready? And my mom would be like, cut up your chicken into pieces so that everyone has enough food. Like, we don't have any more in the oven, but we have enough on our plates, so we got to share. And then we just constantly had people living with us, whether it was just for a couple weeks or a couple months, cousins. Like, we had all these nicknames for people who would live with us. And it was just such a blessing for me to see a family that kind of had no ends to their generosity, and it really shaped Adam and I, and you'll hear more about that soon. But just a little bit about that for me. So,
Adam, faith story, life story.
Well, and just to add to that, we had the pleasure of being those basement dwellers this year, which I'm sure you'll hear about in just a minute. So my name is Adam Hill. I am married to Shelby Hill. In case you didn't catch that.
Sweet.
Yeah. So I was born in Houston, Texas, moved here as a kid, grew up here. And in terms of family structure and kind of what that related to my faith, I grew up going to a pretty conservative Lutheran church, went through the whole catechism type education through it. And a lot of my understanding of church was that it was good, depending on whether I was like information from my dad or my mom. It was like, this is what good families do, or like my mom's faith was authentically her own. But regardless, we were at church. And it was an interesting time growing up, and really when my faith became my own was actually in high school through FCA, which is also where Shelby and I met, which is interesting. Yes, Fellowship of Christian Athletes. So it's when it comes back to generosity, I very much so as a kid saw generosity and giving as, it's my duty, which as like a little kid is like, I've got $1 and that's what I put in the offering plate. And maybe that's what gets me the ability to play with the toys they have here. I don't really know why necessarily. Or maybe it was my mom. It was my mom giving more than my dad thought we should be giving, and them having that squabble. But one thing I'd say, kind of just from a family perspective, generosity that I did see modeled for me was that there was no ends to what my parents would not sacrifice for the sake of each other or for our family. They're extremely generous with their resources, relationships, time, possessions, all those different things. And I'd say that was particularly true within our nuclear family.
That's awesome. Thank you. Megan, give us the rundown.
All right. So I'm Megan Zarian, and I grew up in the church. My parents went to church, took us to church since I was young. And, and I mean, my understanding of God, evolved over time. But I do feel grateful that my parents prioritized their faith growing up. And so I think my view of generosity, I didn't realize I was learning about generosity when I was a kid, just watching my parents. Now as an adult, I realize how intentional they were with their resources. But at the time, it was just like, oh, mom's making dinner for someone again because they had a baby or they, had surgery or, I knew I couldn't run through the store and just be like, Mom, I want that. Because then she would be like, well, why do you need that? And I'd be like, because I want it. And I knew that wasn't usually a sufficient answer. Sometimes, they give me things just for fun. But it was just normal to expect that my parents, were very intentional with their resources. And, we had pictures of missionaries on our fridge. And I was like, okay, they support missionaries. And so as a kid, I just thought it was all very ordinary and not that radical. And then I think as I've grown up, I've been like, wow, the fact that they were always kind of aware of their friends' needs and were always willing to kind of jump in and help when anyone needed anything, I realized that was a really amazing example to watch growing up, and is something that as an adult I realize is really hard to choose generosity in that way and to choose to be intentional with resources. And so as a kid, I remember thinking oh, my parents aren't that interesting and they're not that radical, but now I'm like, wow, they were, they didn't even use the word generosity in day-to-day life, but now I feel like that was an example that I'm really grateful I had of just what kind of daily generosity looks like. And so, yeah.
Thank you. Go for it.
I'm Carol Willis, and I also grew up in a family of faith and in church every Sunday. My earliest memory of giving, form of generosity, for Sunday would be in Sunday school, when as a little girl I would be sent to Sunday school with some coins tied up in the corner of one of my dad's handkerchiefs so that I wouldn't lose the money, and then end Sunday school, untie the knot, and put the coins in the slot on the top of the bank that looks like a church. So I grew from that to my family was not, they didn't talk about money a lot. And so as a kid, I wasn't necessarily tuned into what they did for generosity. But our church had a plan where every family got envelopes to put their offering in every week. And when I got to high school, I got my own envelopes because I had a part-time job. And so it was just an accepted thing that you would give in some way, shape, or form on a regular basis. Perhaps tithing. I remember being fairly young when I learned what tithing meant as a portion of your income. And then as a married person, raising our own children, my husband and I pretty much followed the same pattern, where he was a pastor for a period of time, not all the time we were married, but therefore the idea of tithing and giving to a church and was a normal part of life. I also remember times when maybe he would find out about a family that was in need, and so without it being known, maybe we would go to the store and buy some clothes or something like that, and they would end up with it. So that was a little extra piece that got thrown in then too. So that's about it.
That's great. Thank you. Generosity is one of those things that we don't talk about a lot in church world, primarily because we don't talk about money a lot in church world, and money and generosity tend to be fairly linked to each other, even though that is by no means the only form of generosity. I found that when we talk about something like generosity in theory, it's helpful because we can start to get our minds around this concept. But when we start to hear other people's stories, we begin to learn how we can kind of attach ourselves to their story or resonate with their story and realize that we're not alone and understanding or trying to understand what it means to be generous with the possessions and items that we have. And so hopefully you're catching on to a little bit of someone up here, or maybe everybody up here, how they have some sort of overlap with your story, or there's something you can resonate with. I'm going to ask each elder a question now, just kind of about their own specific experience with generosity. And Megan, we're going to start with you. Megan, your source of income is unique. It's different than sort of the classic, you have a salary for the work that you do, that kind of thing. So I was wondering if you could explain that a little bit to us, and then if you could talk about how generosity works in relationship to the way your income works, being unique as it is.
So I work for a Christian missions organization as a writer, and so my source of income is 100% funded by people's donations. And so basically I have ministry partners who have chosen to partner with me in prayer and through finances to enable me to do my work full time, which, then my work in working for OMF serves people of East Asia. We do church planning among East Asians. And so, it's, I would say my understanding of generosity definitely has been influenced by my job and the way that my income functions, and in part that's my view of God's generosity to me has really been shaped through that, in that all of us are dependent on God's generosity for our work, whether we work for a huge corporation or we're self-employed, or like me, work for a missions organization. But the way my income is set up, I just see that in a very tangible way, because every month I'm seeing, okay, here are the people that God moved to give to me when they could have given to so many other things, and they could have prioritized so many other things. And so even though I feel like each of us, have to be aware of God's generosity to us through our work, just seeing that kind of like monthly spreadsheet come in with, okay, these people are still choosing to give to my work, and that's, reminds me how dependent I am on the Lord and on other people. But it's also made me aware of just the impact of each individual's generosity and their faithfulness to the Lord, because people on my team, they support me at all different amounts, and no one person could really sustain or support the work that I'm doing. It really takes a whole team of people who have each individually decided to respond to the Lord's call on them and to give to me in different amounts. And but each person is such a critical part of my team, and so it's that enables me to do my work. And so I've really come to appreciate just the collective generosity of the church and just how important each person's intentionality and faithfulness to the Lord is, because that enables me to do what I've been called to do. So
that's such a great point, because there are probably some people in your portfolio or spreadsheet that are giving a small amount. Mm-hmm. Is that true? Mm-hmm. So what would you say to the person who says, well, my gift is just a drop in the bucket, like who cares? It's so small, it doesn't really matter. Mm-hmm. What would you say to them?
I would just say it does matter.
Nuh-uh.
Because it's, like I said, every gift matters. And it's really no one person, even people who are, you would think, oh, giving so much and that's they're giving more in a sense, but it really, if each person just decided my gift doesn't matter, then, I wouldn't be able to do my work. And so it's not kind of each decision, each person who's been intentional. I know that there's a lot more behind it than just the financial amount. I know that they have been faithful to the Lord in their own way, and that has been a blessing to me. So anyway, I don't know if it's a great answer. It matters. It's really...
It does matter, yeah. Do you ever find yourself afraid or nervous about being generous yourself because your income is, it feels maybe less consistent, maybe, or less certain?
Yeah, I mean, it does, I guess, well, yeah. The way my position works is, I do... It's like I'm going to end up explaining too much, so I'm just going to avoid that. But
throwing you curveballs. These are extra questions. I did not see these in advance.
I wasn't prepared for this one. But I would say maybe because I've been doing this for 8 years now, I am like, okay, God's always been faithful. It definitely, it's always a decision. It's always, it does give me some pause to think, do I have the space for this? But yeah, I think now God's provided for so long that there's probably, I think about it less now.
There's like a good track record there, right? That's good. Thanks, Megan. This next question is for you, Adam. Adam, your family experienced a significant loss, and I think that sometimes in loss is where we experience generosity and sometimes lack thereof from other people. Could you talk for a little bit about that loss and how you experienced your faith community and friends and family, how you were the recipient of generosity in that?
Yeah, absolutely. So my dad passed away in 2016. The good or bad part is it was from a 4-year battle with cancer that was supposed to be a 6-month one. So there was plenty of time, I guess, from the perspective to have conversations that maybe wouldn't have come up naturally. And there are parts of it that are a blessing, but clearly there was not necessarily a great outcome at the end of it. So it was certainly definitely a very difficult time, just difficult experience, and one that lots of people can relate to, unfortunately. But when it comes to what was my experience through that time, at the time I was in a job that was pretty, I guess, time sensitive. Everything was urgent kind of a thing, and they didn't have any sort of bereavement policy or anything like that, so that was not ideal. But luckily I had a very good friend who was my immediate supervisor, so he took on a ton on his plate to give me as much space as he could. But when it comes to what I experienced from a generosity perspective from my faith community, we were going to a little bit, probably quite a bit larger church at the time, but we were in a small group. And one of the things that was kind of amazing to me in that time was we were in a small group that was, we were fairly new to it. We hadn't been going there. We hadn't been there a super long time. It almost had not quite transitioned, made that next transfer from like church friends to these are people I hang out with. Like we were relatively new, but we still had vulnerability, and they knew about everything that was going on. And these people all showed up in different ways and in simple ways. And one of the things that, things from bringing meals to just taking care of some of the stuff that is just the day-to-day minutia that we all have to do. And why that was that just overwhelmed me with the feeling that I had people surrounding me that were generously giving their time and their resources to, I guess, give what they could. There weren't necessarily words to say that were going to be the right words or anything like that. But what it did enable was it enabled me to have space to process, to think, and really to be in a place where, despite the sadness, despite the grieving, despite the despair, that I was able to have enough space to leave that season of life with gratitude, not only for that experience, but particularly for the fact that I had a father that loved me very much through his flaws, and that I could recognize that I was so thankful that I had someone I missed. And then the other piece of it is just going through loss with family. It's super tough. Going through loss with anyone is super tough. People don't process things the same way. And something that made me laugh would make another person cry, things like that. And to be able to have enough air coverage of generosity, of taking care of the little stuff, enabled me to have grace for my brother and my mom as we kind of walked through that together.
That's great.
That's pretty much everything.
That's awesome. Thanks. Would you say that, and this is kind of a yes or no question, but did everybody in your small group, when you were going through that, did they always do or say the right thing?
Without question, no. They absolutely. People don't know how to deal with loss. You'll never say the right thing. You'll want to. I'll give you an example. Right? Nothing's going to feel similar to your own personal loss. And this is probably one of the things that was so great about the generosity that I received, to give me space to be able to feel this way. But I guess one of the things I'd run into a lot is that, I just lost my father. I'm in, my mid-20s. My dad was fairly young and healthy prior to this. And a lot of people say, I just lost my grandpa. Like, I know how you feel. And it's like, had I not had the space to process what they're trying to communicate, like, it would have just made me mad, right? It's just like, you don't get it. Don't tell me you get it. And but really what they're trying to communicate is, I want to be here for you, and I don't know what that looks like, but just know that what you're feeling is other people are feeling it too. And so I guess just to have just grace in what you're receiving from people is super important in times like that.
It's good. It's profound. Shelby, next question goes to you. Grew up as a pastor's kid, which my kids are currently growing up as. So basically, I'm just trying to figure out here what I'm supposed to do. So great respect for your parents. I would love to hear just a little bit from you, how you and your family experienced generosity, both receiving and giving in that particular scenario.
So I was thinking about this question, and the first thing I thought of was like, it felt so scary growing up in that way, because I've seen churches like fold under because there wasn't enough. And I've seen, my dad's position get cut, or parts of his, salary be cut, and it was just scary. And so I feel like I always knew the urgency of tithing and giving. And for a while, it was like this looming fear. And I feel like God kind of redeemed that picture in my heart, which is a good thing, because I don't want to be living in fear of that. But definitely I had that element growing up. But then on the other end of it, the more positive end of the spectrum, I feel like I was so blessed to witness stories that are just unfathomable of generosity. And I mean, you can talk to me after, because I have so many, but stories from people writing exact amount check that came in the mail the night before, these dramatic stories. And then families who needed something, they come from another country and they needed, a job, and people come in and adopt them and mentor them and walk through just moving to a new place. And then extreme stories where one family wanted to live a year of Jubilee. They had learned that in Scripture in their study, and paying off major debts in the church. And it was just stories that you hear and think, oh, that's so unheard of, that's so radical. But growing up in the way that I did, I feel like it was kind of normal. And now that I'm grown, kind of like what you said, you realize this isn't normal. These are stories that kind of inspire me to think bigger than just the monthly 10%, but think how can we step in and really use our resources to bless people, and find people who are kind of on the fringes of our community and in the fringes of our city, and fill in needs where there are needs. And it's just, I feel really passionate about this question. So like Nathan said, there's too many to share. So it's just exciting. And I feel really thankful for that, because how I started answering this question is so scary and so intense. And it felt really uncertain, and there was a lot of hurt there. But I feel like God has used some of these narratives to really kind of restore that and give me more hope moving forward for church and for church, families and ministry. And your kids will turn out just great. They'll be just fine. Just keep telling them all the amazing ways God's doing things here and in our city. it was a really unique way to grow up, but I'm like so thankful for it because like I don't think I see things the same because of it.
If we had more time, I'd want to hear more about that transition from giving in fear to giving in hope or in joy. And so maybe that's something we can talk about more some other time. It's a good question to ask her. Carol, we're going to go to you. There's a mic right next to you, actually, if you want to grab that. What does generosity look like for you as a self-employed single person? So how does the inconsistency or uncertainty of pay and income, and how does your life stage affect your understanding of generosity?
Okay. Well, first I want to just talk a little bit about when I became single. When my husband passed away, which was 11 years ago. And right away, I had a lot of work to do to stabilize my finances and my life in general. And that was my top priority. But in the midst of that, I experienced, like Shelby talked about, like so much generosity from others. So the church that I was part of, it was not here, it was in a different part of the country, came alongside of me in so many ways. I had men who fixed my lawnmower and taught me how to use it because I was scared of it, because I had never used it. I had neighbors who saw to it that my driveway got plowed out in the wintertime. Another neighbor, little high school girl that came over and helped me clean the leaves out of my yard when my 13 trees let it drop in the fall. Just twice somebody stepped up and paid my expenses to come out here and visit my kids. It just was one thing after another shown to me, and it was part of God showing me that He had me, that He had me. That's the best way for me to say it. And so, yes, as a single person at this stage of my life, being self-employed, there is some insecurity and inconsistency in income, but it's better than it used to be. And I have seen evidence over and over again of God taking care of me. I don't take that, well, in a way I do take it for granted because it's God. But in other ways I don't, because each time it just means so much. And so as I shared here one other time, not in the panel, but just my journey from fear to can I give now? Can I contribute to this church that's come to mean so much to me? Okay, sporadically I can do that. Move from that to, okay, God has me. God has shown me over and over again. I have no reason to think that that won't continue. And so I can make that commitment, a step of faith, to say, all right, I'll sign up for the monthly giving. I can do that. I can, and that's not the only thing, but that was a big step for me. And I just came to the place where I had to say yes to God in that.
That's great. And
it is a place of joy.
Mm-hmm.
So,
thank you for sharing that. We're short on time, so we're going to rapid fire through this last question. The last question is for everybody. So I want us all to hear about a way in which you have been uniquely generous. I want you to think just for a moment about how uncomfortable it is to answer a question like that in front of a bunch of people. Okay, so this is going to take a lot of courage. Generosity, again, is sort of the sort of thing we kind of talk about in the shadows. It's sort of a secrecy thing. But I've found that when I hear about the ways that other people have been generous, it sparks in my imagination ways that I can step into that as well. So I'm going to ask you all to quickly, in just a few seconds, 30 seconds, minute, whatever, just say real quickly, what is a way in which you have been uniquely generous, and what has that meant to you, that process? Carol, can we start with you?
Okay. Yeah, it's a little uncomfortable. Mm-hmm. It's like give in secret, right?
Mm-hmm. Not here.
But
I'm just kidding.
So I volunteer with an organization locally here called Second Chances Denver, and I have some experience in grant writing. And so one of the things that I've been able to do for them is to write some grants for them. And I did that on a volunteer basis. And the result for them was some funding that came in that would help them to continue to help women in crisis and generational poverty here locally. So that's just one thing that I think God prepared me to do.
That's great. It's different than writing a check, right?
Yes, it is.
You gave of your ability, and that resulted in someone else writing a check, which I think is awesome. That's great. Thanks. Megan?
Okay, so this is not going to be unique. My apologies. But this was just the example I thought of when we were told we were going to be asked this question. So I guess unique in the sense of in the circles I run in. As you can imagine, I meet lots of missionaries, and I recently was back east sharing a ministry update with a church that supports me, and there were several of us missionaries doing that, and there was a missionary couple who works in Africa doing Bible translation that just happened to come because they heard some other missionaries were in town. They just showed up, and they were asked kind of informally at the end just to give a ministry update themselves, and they, the rest of us were trying to give these like, yes, God is good. And, sometimes you feel like you have to give these really like optimistic ministry updates so people will want to keep partnering with you. And this couple was just really raw and honest and was sharing how much they were struggling. And they had both lost grandparents recently, and they were trying to return to Africa to do the work they had been doing, but they didn't have the support they needed. And they just, through tears, were saying the translation team just like wants us to get back there so we can like just do the work, and like the school is waiting for Teresa to come back and teach, and like it was just but they just didn't have the support they needed, and so it was I feel like God kind of that gave me the opportunity to hear about their need in a way that was just really sobering for me. Like I know I see missionaries a lot and I meet them a lot, but like I still have an ongoing struggle to like take the risk to be generous or to give, or I know earlier I said like, oh, it's not really a problem I don't really think about God's provide for me, so I don't feel insecurity about giving. I don't mean to give that impression, because it's because of my own like selfishness and general insecurity when it comes to finances. It is something that can be difficult to do, but it was just a really hearing them share and just seeing that illustration of like what's at stake for us as the church and the opportunity we have to be part of God's work. I ended up just like joining their support team, and they like God just kind of really provided for them really quickly. They had a deadline they had to raise their funds by to be able to get back to Africa, and it was cool to kind of watch the figure move up for them, and they are now on their way to Africa. And so it was just cool to have the opportunity to hear about their work, and for God to make me aware that I actually could play a part in meeting that need.
Thanks, Megan. Adam?
Yeah. Once again, reiterating, right? No one up here is perfect, has it down pat how to be generous. These are just examples of things that we're also working to become more generous with. But one of the things that Shelby and I do is we give to FCA, which is, as I mentioned, where we met. We were 13 and 15 at the time, known each other a long time. But so one of the things about FCA that has been uniquely special to me is when I was a kid, I mentioned the church I went to, we were in a spot where our youth group was cut due to budget. And so clearly that was a negative. But I don't know what path I really would have been on had I not found FCA in high school. And it uniquely changed my life. And it's it's just an organization that has so much reach that you wouldn't even know. And it just so happens that my father-in-law is area director for FCA in Arapahoe County, which actually a portion of Arapahoe County, and does include Englewood High School, which is new in the last year. And so beyond just giving financially, one of the things that I've tried to help him do, I have a background in software sales, so I'm communicating via email all the time, right? And so I've worked with her dad to get a feel for how are you communicating back to people what you're doing and why does it matter? And so I've kind of helped him try to figure out, like, how do I, like, develop a system of like, what am I keeping track of? How do I show what did this money or investment go to? Really to kind of change the perspective from being like, yeah, I wrote the check, to like, no, I'm partnered in this with this mission for these kids. And so that's one of the ways that I've tried to give my own talents or things I've learned back into that same mission too. And so anyways, I could talk about FCA for a super long time. If that is something you're interested actually in hearing more about, I could give you her dad's phone number, and he'd talk till he's blue in the face about it. He's absolutely all in on what he's doing, and there's been a lot of really cool stories that have been happening in Englewood this year. And I will share my favorite stat. He has kept track of the number of Gatorades that he's handed out in the last year, which is just hilarious to me. But it's pretty interesting to get an update on that.
So Adam got to share kind of about an organization that we're passionate about together that we get to give to. I get the opportunity to share a quick little bit about how a family here at our church really got to bless our family when we were in a tight spot. And so right before we had our baby, we sold our house. It was actually the Sunday before she was born on a Wednesday. That was fun. Surprise! So a couple weeks before that, we knew we were going to sell our house because we had another house we were getting ready to move into, but it wasn't quite ready. So the Johnsons actually opened their home to us. They have a full house already, and it was just incredible to be living in a space where it wasn't ours at all, but it felt like ours. Everything felt like it was mine. Like, not selfishly, it sounds kind of rude, but it was like, this is all ours. Like, we live here. This is our home. These are our family right now. And so it's really cool to see friends become even more family than they were, and also just the giving of space and the giving of resources and just taking care of me in a really vulnerable time. I brought my baby home into their basement, like very vulnerable and very raw. And so I'll never forget how that really shaped our family and Elsie's life too. She's always going to know that fun story. So that I can talk more about that too, but it was just a super real take on like what we say every week, this generosity prayer, which I think that's what we're going to do now.
That's it. Would you all give our elders a round of applause, please? Thank you. Thank you for the courage and vulnerability that took. We're going to say our generosity prayer together, and then we're going to rearrange a couple things so we can wrap up and get to our happy hour. But that's going to be on the screen if you would join me in this prayer. All that we have received from God. We bring nothing into this world, and we take nothing out of it. We choose to follow the way of Jesus and increase in generosity until it can be said, there is no one in need among us. We choose to be faithful stewards of all our resources, relationships, time, possessions, and money. We choose to be generous because our Father is generous. And as his daughters and sons, we want to show the world what he is like. Amen.